15 and 16. Sam Aaron. Thank you, guys. Good evening, and my name is Pete Van Woerd. I am relatively new to Pella. My wife Carol and I, we manage the Victorian Villa just east of town. You've probably seen it. It's that big brick building as you're headed out of town, and we've been here for about a year. And this has been a really good season for us because I was born in the Netherlands, and so this is a kind of homecoming for me. And we've had a great year here, and I actually really love this town. And one of the things that I happened to experience as I was getting used to the community was I ran into the folks from the Pella Youth Coalition, and Tricia and her team. And I immediately identified with their mission and their vision, partly because their story is in many ways my story. And so as I grew up, even though I grew up in a great Dutch family with good morals, when I was a teenager, I strayed away from that upbringing into making some really poor choices. And I ended up making life miserable for my parents. And it wasn't all that great for me either. So what I have done now that I've kind of figured life out a little bit, I have found myself saying, I want to try and make up for that which I messed up. And so now one of the missions in my life is to try and provide encouragement and hope to parents who may feel like, they're hoping that things go well with their kids, but they're still trying to figure out whether or not it will. And so they need encouragement and support. And there may be some in the room who's saying, my kids aren't doing so well. And is there a place for me to find some hope? And so our purpose tonight is to try and provide some of that. So a lot of people have been asking me, so Pete, what is hope in the dark? What is it actually going to do? And I have had a hard time explaining it, and so I'm going to just try and prepare you a little bit for what you're going to experience in these moments together. We're going to do a little singing. You don't have to, because it's going to be great from the platform. We're going to say a prayer. We're going to hear some testimonials from young people. We're going to tell a story. You're going to read some poetry. We're going to read some poetry. And you'll be introduced to some resources through the Pella Youth Coalition. So we're going to do a little bit of everything, and hopefully somewhere along the way you'll experience something good, and you'll hear some things that might be an encouragement to you or to people that you know. So I'm going to hand the mic off to Pastor Doug, and he is going to lead us in our prayer tonight. Doug?
In 1984, before June, I OD'd 3 times. And it was for the grace of God and a personal relationship with Jesus that I found hope. Every one of my friends that I hung out with went to not jail, they went to prison, except me and Aaron Taylor in Springfield, Oregon. We were the 2 guys where we found our hope was in Christ. And he too is a pastor today. And so if you're here today, and we're going to pray in just a second, if you're here and you're trying to figure out, hey, I just really feel hopeless, my kids are I'm really struggling, I want to encourage you that there is hope. That there is a God in heaven who first off loves you and cares about you, and that even every tear that you would shed, he would catch in a bottle. And that you're that important to him in your circumstance. And so, as with me, where I discovered hope in Christ, that we too can go to him for that hope. And so, even as Peter said to the guy at the temple gates, he said, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give to you. And one of the things that I carry and I will release over you today is hope. And so let's go ahead and bow. So Jesus, I release supernatural hope over moms and dads that really don't know what to do at the wee hours in the morning, that they're laying awake at night and they're crying over their son and their daughter. I ask, Father, that you would release hope over them, that you'd give them wisdom, that you give them knowledge, and you give them discernment of what to do, who to go to, who to resource. And I pray, Father, that only you can release hope. As you did with me, may you release hope over these families, over moms and dads and these students, in the name of Jesus. And so we just would honor you, and we declare that you are the God of hope. In your name, amen.
Thank you, Doug. All right. So you've seen me before if you've been at a Youth Coalition event. And if you haven't, I'm going to just give you a brief intro of my name is Trish Fanzi. I'm one of the co-leads along with Dave Buchelman and John Amos. And the mission of the Youth Coalition is to provide students and parents the tools and support they need to positively impact substance-free attitudes, behaviors, and norms. You can tell I ripped this out of a presentation. We exist. So why was the Pella Youth Coalition necessary? Because everyone in an addictive home, in an addictive school, in an addictive community is impacted. So therefore, that is each of us in this room and every one of the friends circles and organizations that we represent and are a part of. Because there is an addiction challenge with teens in our community, and it's substantial. And we couldn't sit back and not do anything about it any longer. So a lot of our content prior to tonight has been pretty heavy. It's been startling. It's been unnerving for some people. And so in conversation with Pete, when he came to the Youth Coalition team and said, I think we could do something with a focus on hope, That was energizing for us. We felt like the community was ready for hope. And so free event, we have stickers. You see our logo on the handout, Be Free. So free events, free of judgment, free of assumptions, free to be our best me and our best we. So with that, I want to share with you two things before I conclude with a little story of my own. So several of us in the Youth Coalition have been invited into walking along personal stories with people in the community. And those are stories of struggles and success. We know one organization in this community has had 20 people contact them in response to the resource list that's been provided by the Youth Coalition. So our role is not to be the solution, but to be the conduit to connect people to solutions. And we know one Pella graduate who started attending AA and received his 1-month recovery coin this week at age 29. So I'm going to share with you, the word hope is significant to me. The dragonfly on my necklace is significant to me. And I want to just read to you a portion of words that I wrote several years ago after a dragonfly was gifted to me. I learned that a dragonfly starts out as an ugly, brown, scaly bug that lives in the mud most of its life. It might live in that soupy mud of a pond for 2 to 5 years. It grows and molts, maybe up to 12 times, before it is large enough to climb up a tall plant. As it comes up out of the soupy mud, exposure to air causes the bug to begin breathing. The skin splits at a weak spot behind the head and releases a completely new creature, a dragonfly. It can't fly at first because the wings are wet and the body is weak after being a mud-grubbing bug for so many years. It is perched at the top of a thin leaf, going through a powerful transformation. At this time, it is at its weakest point in life ever. It's no longer hiding in the mud, but it can't yet fly. It can no longer crawl, but threat of predators and weather surround. That's when the fresh air comes through and the warm sunlight shines down. The wings become dry and strong, the colors emerge, and the dragonfly can fly. Once it emerges into the light, it can't go back to mud and darkness. Dragonflies are most powerful under the effects of warm sunlight. Their colors are a result of reflecting and refracting the power of light. So when I look at a dragonfly, when I gift a dragonfly, I see a symbol of strength for today, hope for tomorrow, a symbol of patience during those years, those seasons of unknown waiting, and a symbol of a warm, loving heart reaching out to share victory in being free.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh DeWard. For those of you who don't know me, I'm going to steal this stand if I can. I'm from Pella, went to Pella High. Sorry, one sec, let me get this going here. All right. But anyway, Trisha asked me if I would come and share just kind of like a testimony, I guess, of how I was able through high school to stay away from drug and alcohol abuse, which honestly makes me a little uncomfortable. It makes me feel like I'm just telling you I'm this awesome person, but I did some dumb stuff in high school, so I was able to stay away from drugs and alcohol, but don't think I'm up here just like this perfect person, I guess. But anyway, as I was kind of reflecting on this, like my own experiences in high school, what I started to think a lot about was some things my parents taught me and instilled in me, and some things that they did with me that I think would maybe be beneficial to share. And so I kind of asked myself the question of like, okay, how did I kind of like stay away from those things, drug abuse, alcohol abuse? And I kind of came up with two key points that I want to share. And the first thing was, looking back, I was able to see the fruit of a life like that, if that makes sense. I was able to see, like, if you engaged in those things, what would happen down the road. And that sounds really simple, but I think it's pretty profound. And I started to ask myself, like, well, how was I able to do that? How was I able, at a younger age, to look down the road and be like, okay, if I do this, a few years from now, this is where I could be. And a couple things that I think happened. Number one, I remember from a young age, my parents let me, they gave me the freedom to make decisions for myself. And some really, like, kind of insignificant things. Like when I was a kid, if I didn't want to get a haircut, my parents wouldn't make me get a haircut. And whatever I wanted to wear to school, like, I could wear to school. And just like these little decisions, but what that started to do is it taught me to think for myself, and it taught me to understand that the decisions I made impacted my life. And so when I was a little kid deciding that I wanted to wear shorts on a cold day, well, now when I'm in high school and I'm faced with some, like, maybe bigger decisions, growing up I had been doing that all along, and I was kind of able to say, like, okay, like, if I make this choice, this is on me. And so it really, it kind of forced me to, like, stop and think a little more before I would make decisions. And I think that really, like, impacted the way I lived as I was growing up. And the other thing, and this is also simple, but it really did make a difference for me, I remember, especially when I was reflecting, my parents would talk to me about this stuff a lot. And it's not like they sat me down and like, all right, we're going to have the alcohol talk and tell you about how horrible it is. But they would just, like, thread it into conversations. And I remember my mom, like, she taught me what a gateway drug was. And my parents taught me about how alcoholism can run in your family, and it runs in our family. And so that's something, like, you just need to be careful about. And every time I had those singular conversations, I would always leave, like, it was never like this profound thing, like, oh, okay, like, they just told me this little snippet about drugs or alcohol. But when you put all of that together, it's over years of them just kind of throwing little things in there, it started to really shape the way I thought about it. And they really impacted the way I saw these things. And I didn't even realize it until you guys asked me to speak, and I was like, oh, wow, like, yeah, that really had an impact on me. A little 30-second conversation here, a little talk here, a little talk there, over 4 or 5 years really changes the way you think about something. And it was kind of like a whole family effort. I remember my grandpa telling me one time that you can spend your whole life doing good things and building up a reputation, and one bad decision can wipe all of your good decisions away. And it's kind of a cliche thing, but, like, when I was a high school kid, that really stuck with me, and I was like, oh, like, I took that to heart, and I listened. And so all of that, it's really simple stuff, and it sounds like duh, but for a kid growing up, it starts to become pretty profound and really shape the way they live and act. And then the second thing I thought a lot about, and I think it's so important for all parents and really for people in general, is when I was a kid, and still now, like when I was a kid, I'm 24, it's not like I'm this old sage, but I have a lot of dreams. Like, kids, like, dream about stuff, and I think adults too. Like, everybody wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Like, everybody wants to do something with their life and be somebody, no matter who you are. And especially when you're a kid and it feels like the world is at your fingertips and you can do anything and be anybody. And I remember my parents, they really empowered me and encouraged me just to dream. Whatever I wanted to do, whatever I wanted to be, they would get behind it. And not in, like, an unhealthy way, like idolizing, becoming something or whatever, but no, they saw I was passionate about things, and they would get excited about it. And they would give me opportunities. And they would help me see, like, yeah, you can be this. So for me, it was to be a high school football player, which now it's like, oh my gosh, like, you wanted to be an Iowa high school football player? Like, so lame, you know? But when you're, like, a kid, it's like, that was the coolest thing ever. You'd watch these high school football players, and that's what I wanted to be. And I remember my parents, like, when I would go lift in the morning to the weight room, they would celebrate with me. Like, they would encourage me, like, hey, way to go, like, way to put that work in. When I made the varsity team as a sophomore and never played, I just stood on the sideline, but you got to wear the cool varsity jersey and be there on Friday nights. Like, they celebrated that with me, like, to stand on the sideline, like, little things. But it taught me how to dream, and it taught me that it was okay try and be something and to go for something. And my dad tells me, and I need to figure out how to like make this into a better quote. So I'll say it and then I'll give an example so it makes more sense. But he always would tell me, you can never sustain running from something. You can only sustain running towards something. And what I mean by that is, so let's use my life and drug and alcohol abuse. My parents wouldn't, and I won't be able to sustain if all I ever think about is how I'm not going to use drugs and alcohol. That's all I think about. Like, I'm not going to go to these situations. I'm not going to do this. Like, I'm going to stay away from it. I don't even want to hear about it. Like, and you just get fixated on it. You can't sustain that. But if I start thinking about, I want to be a high school football player, and I start thinking about, well, I need to get in the weight room, and I need to eat the right way, and I need to have good enough grades so I can play, and now all of a sudden I'm running towards something, and naturally the byproduct is I'm going to stay away from that stuff. Not because I'm thinking about it and so worried about it, but because no, like, I want to be something more, and so to get to where I want to go, like, I'm not going to do that. That's going to get in the way of who I want to be. And that was big for me. And so I would say that as parents, let your kids dream and empower them to dream. And I would even say in high school, it doesn't really matter what the dream is. If you want to be the high school quarterback or you want to have a solo and show choir, like whatever it is, like I don't have a dream to be a high school football player anymore. Like I want to do so many other things, but the practice of believing in myself and being empowered by my parents really changed my life and changed the way I go about life. And so you don't need to worry about, well, they're not very good or they're not very good at this. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, get excited with them, empower them, help them see that they can run towards something instead of being like so worried about what they might fall into, if that makes sense. And then one of the thing I want to talk about, I was just talking with Trisha about this while we were sitting down there, and we had a conversation a few years ago. I remember this now that you brought it up. When I was in college, and I guess when I was thinking about sharing with you guys, I was like, okay, like let me give here's my story, here's how I stayed away. But she brought up, like, there's maybe some people here whose kids are in that minority who aren't abusing drugs and alcohol, and is there a message for them? And I really think there is. It can be a really lonely place to choose out of that stuff. In high school, yes, and I would say even more so in college, there's just such a culture of that. It's lonely. I mean, there's times, I remember in college, like, people would, be partying or whatever, and you would just, like, go to your dorm room, and it's, like, Friday night, and it's like, what am I doing, It's super boring, but in those moments, it can be really hard to hold on to your convictions when everybody's doing it, And I had family, siblings, friends, parents that I was in communication with all the time, and they were encouraging me, and they were telling me they were proud of me, not in those moments of when I'm like by myself in my dorm, but throughout the week of like, hey, I'm proud of who you are, I'm proud of what you stand for, I'm proud of what you do. So then when I am in those moments, I'm able to stand with conviction because I've been supported throughout my life. So if you're a parent or someone who has people who are in that minority, just encourage them. Tell them you're proud of them. Even if you told them 100 times, keep telling them. I mean, the love and encouragement from a parent will change a kid's life. No doubt about it. And you can never say those things enough. You just can't. So yeah, I would encourage you to do that. And I want to close with this brief thought. I was thinking about this event and thinking about just the hard situations, and I thought, like, what am I going to do for 10 minutes? Like, I'm talking for 10 minutes, am I really going to, I'm not going to solve this problem, And the reality is, I'm only 24, but I've experienced things in my life, and I would bet you have too. You come across brokenness in the world, whether it's drugs, alcohol, racism, poverty, hunger. I mean, you name it. There's just these systems that are so complex and pervasive throughout the world that when you're faced with it, it's just more than your humanity can even bear. Like, you can't reason your way through it. And I thought about, like, a parent who has a young kid and they raise them and they're great parents and just the love they have for that kid, and then they grow up and see them making these choices. Like, what a tough place to be that I just don't understand. I can't imagine being that parent. And as I'm thinking through this process, what comes to me is there's really two roads you can go down. When you're faced with this brokenness that's more than you can bear, and one is of despair and bitterness and hopelessness, really. And the other is you have to find somewhere to place your hope, is really what it comes down to. And I think that it's great to have these events and talk about things and strategize, no doubt. But when you're faced with the brokenness and the weight of it, that you just can't bear it, you have to find a place to put your hope. And so that's my challenge for you guys tonight, is ask yourselves, where am I putting my hope? And wherever I'm putting it, is that gonna sustain me? Is that gonna be there for me always? So just something to think about. So thank you guys for listening to me. Thanks for having me.
Good evening. There we go. My name is Anna Lou, and this is my husband Joe. And in an effort to continue our message of hope, when I chose this song, "Scars You Are Beautiful," I didn't realize it actually has the word, "There's a hope that's waiting for you in the dark." So hopefully you can hear that, and it addresses girls, but whether it's a girl or a boy, we all need to know that we are beautiful, even if it's mainly beautiful. And so hopefully this song can communicate that.
She just wants to be beautiful, she goes unnoticed, she knows no limits, she craves attention, she praises an image she prays to be sculpted by the sculptor. Oh, she don't see the light that's shining deeper than the eyes can find it. Maybe we had made her blind, so she tries to cover up her pain and cut her woes away. 'Cause cover girls don't cry after their face is made. But there's a hope that's waiting for you in the dark. You should know you're beautiful just the way you are. You don't have to change a thing, the world could change its heart. No scars to you're beautiful, we're stars and we're beautiful. Oh,
Josh, I just bet you tonight, but you're going places, young man. For a 24-year-old to be saying that kind of wisdom, I just thank you so much for, not only for what you shared, but the humility with which you shared it. Really well done. Jeff, come on, join me here. So I have a good friend with me. He just came from across the pond to be with us. And you'll notice that really quick when you hear his accent. So thank you, first of all, for making the trip. But even more so, I know a little bit about what you're going to be sharing. And you have a very inspiring story, but also a very challenging story. So I'm going to ask a series of questions. And I want you to begin by just telling us a little bit about like what you do now. You came over from the UK, but obviously when you are there, you have responsibilities and you have a role that you're doing a lot of stuff in a lot of different places. So just share a little bit about what you're doing.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's you that has the accent, obviously, not me. And so it's really good to be with you. Yeah, currently, I work for the Methodist Church in Britain, and I'm in learning and development, and so I work with a group of churches across the West Midlands. That's just around the Birmingham area, if you want to know, and I live just about 45 minutes from Manchester, so that's where I live, if you've ever visited England. And so I work with about 220 churches, thinking about how they do their youth work or their children's work, about how they work in terms of ministry, the kind of work they do in the community, and when they've got training needs or development needs, individual or corporate, I work with them on how we can best meet those needs. I didn't always do this.
No, but you also, you're involved, you're like what we would call a city council.
Oh yes,
right?
yeah,
So
in my local community, which is a small place just outside the city, I'm an elected councillor. Does that seem the same thing that you would know?
Yeah.
And so every 4 years we have elections, and I've been voted in, and so I work for the local community as a local councillor, sitting on the council in our district, and kind of all kinds of things that the local community have a need of. So they call me or email me or knock at the door and ask me to support their causes and things like that. So that keeps me busy.
And I don't want to, because you're not going to tell them all this unless I prompt you. But,
Okay.
So you've also been a social worker. You worked for.
I was a social worker for 30 years in children and families in the city where I live and in the county where I live. And so I was an investigator for child protection cases, and I worked generically as a children and families worker for 30 years. And the last 7 years of that, I was what was called a chair of child protection conferences, which is basically where the police, education, health, other services that are involved with a family come together to look at the kind of solutions that we would need in order to make this family successful and safe. And normally they would come round the table with me when all the kind of voluntary things had been exhausted. Does that make sense? And so it's like, come round the table or else. And normally they're either very angry or very sad. And so my job was to kind of first of all read 20-page reports twice a day, and then to meet with the family, and then to have this conference and to make this conference work so that children were safe and families became successful living together. And that's what I did for 7 years, 14 times a week, and it was quite trying.
All right. So and then the last thing, you when we were having conversation about the kinds of things that you do, you also helped write policy for the government as it related to kids and youth in trouble.
I did, yeah, and I'll come on to why that was later. But certainly, one of the problems with lots of young people in trouble is that their education really suffers. And so I had that experience myself, and I'll come on to that in a little while. But yeah, I helped government to write policies around the education of looked after children who are in the care of the local authority, and how we could enable those children to succeed better and to achieve more whilst they were living away from their families. Oh, the other thing I do, and I don't know if it's worth mentioning, I also am a chaplain to the County Fire and Rescue Service. And I've not been doing that long, about a year, but I travel down the motorway all the time, and every week I just seem to be seeing fire engines on the side of the road attending to accidents, either lorries on fire or cutting people out of cars. And I just thought to myself, do you know, who cares for the firefighters? Who cares for the rescue workers? And I just then, one day I thought, do you know, I'm seeing this far too often. So I just picked up the phone and I rang the fire and rescue service and said, could I come and be a chaplain to you? And just get alongside some of the guys and the women who are firefighters and rescue workers. And they said, we would love to have you. And so every week I go into my local fire and rescue service and we have some great chats. And I'm just there for them.
So really what you're saying is you're kind of a big deal.
No, not really.
You are. You can just go ahead. It's all right. It's all right.
I'm British, and so, you know, we're very good at kind of playing down our achievements. But, you know, over the years I feel I've done quite a lot, and sometimes it's just not that I've sought that, but I might just see something and think, you know, yeah, I could do that. I could help. I could be of support. I could be of service. I can get involved. I've got a little bit of time. It's 2 hours. It's 4 hours. It's, you know, nothing at all really, and I've just taken that initiative.
Now, the reason I make such a big deal about what you're doing now is because when you were growing up and you look back at your life and your family, that would not have been predicted.
Wow, not at all, no.
Yeah, could you just kind of talk a little bit about where you know, how you grew up, what happened, and that part of your story?
Yeah,
if you would.
And I came from a family, a very difficult family, a family that was involved very heavily in the city in criminal activity. It was well known to be a criminal family. In fact, there were meetings in the council chamber about how they were going to deal with my family because, you know, it was a bit out of control. And my father was a heavy criminal and spent a lot of time in prison, but when he wasn't in prison, he was causing havoc in the community and in the city. And I grew up in that context. And many times throughout my childhood, I was removed from the family and taken into the care of the local authority to protect me and to get me away from that. And I think the expectation was that I would, from a family side, go into that kind of mix of criminal activity which involved drugs and sex and alcohol and tobacco and violence. I had family members who were very violent, both within the home and outside in the community. And they also spent time in prison, and some of that was very harrowing. But the local authority would turn up every so often and take me away, and then I would end up in a children's home for a year or so, and then when things seemed to improve, I would be sent home, and then, you know, it would be terrible at home, and then I would go back into local authority care. So I kind of went through about 12 different children's homes, and each of those children's homes had about 14 to 20 children in of different ages. And I grew up in that, and that was a very interesting experience because some of that was quite positive and formative, and others were not so good and were quite negative. And so that was my experience throughout my childhood. When I got to one of the things about that, before I was in children's homes, I kind of didn't attend school because there was no expectation upon me to attend school at all from my family, and so it was okay if I didn't go, and nobody was making me to go. And so when I actually did arrive in school, in primary school, as a child, I kind of couldn't read, I couldn't write, and I didn't know how to interact with other children. And so, you know, when there was instructions given, I kind of just didn't understand that was, you know, essential, or you had to do it. I thought it was an option. And so I was quite difficult in primary school. But I have to say, in each of my different school experiences, they always seemed to be a person. We could call them formally a mentor, if you like, but just somebody who would get alongside me. In primary years, it was a man named John Cobishley, and he just kind of looked at me and he treated me like I was kind of worth something. And that was really different for me because I'd grown up thinking that, you know, I just wasn't worth anything at all. And he really had belief in me and encouraged me to do things. And I was really, I was really shocked in one way by that, but I was also pleased. And so I began to kind of seek him out a little bit, and he would be very encouraging. And I used to swim, and he encouraged me to do that, and I kind of did some achievements in that. And he also made sure that, you know, I had necessary books and papers and things to write with and so on, and that was really good. When I went to high school, there was another man. He discovered that I couldn't write virtually when I arrived in his English class. His name was Barry Alcock. He's dead now. But he encouraged me to write, to learn how to write, to learn how to think. he challenged me, again, he was a person that believed in me and expected me to perform and told me I could, and I shouldn't shy away from doing things in a positive way, and that was really a great thing too. And so, actually, one of the things that we know about children in care in the UK is that less than 5% of the population of all children in care achieve like 3 decent examination results. You know, like an A to C or something. And so actually, there was no expectation on me at all from the care system to achieve anything. As long as I could just leave and keep my nose clean, they would be happy with that. But these people, particularly in the education system, particularly 2 people believed in me and encouraged me and told me I could achieve stuff. And when I left high school, I kind of had enough qualifications to go on to university. But the funny thing about that was, in those days, and I'm talking about the early 70s, that there was no provision for any child who left care to kind of continue in education. So there was no money, there was no... In fact, I had an interview at university. I told you this, didn't I? I had an interview at university, and I went to university in York, and the social worker came with me. I was just coming up to... I was 17, coming up to 18, and they came with me, and I sat in the interview to study drama and theatre arts and music, and we had the interview, and they said, "Oh, great, you're in." And I said, "Can I ask a question? Where will I be living when it's the end of term?" And the social worker turned and looked at me, and I looked at the tutors, and they said, "Well, we don't know." And I said, "Could I stay here?" And the tutor said, "Well, it's Christmas at the end of term this year, and all the students go home." And I said, "I don't have a home." And it struck me then that actually, it's really important that post-18, I mean, things have changed now. We have laws in the UK which protect children from 18 to 25 and provide for them extra funding and extra workers and provision for them, and it's a statutory responsibility. But there was none of that then. Wow. And so very, very few children went on to do any education. In fact, when I was in a children's home, I lived on an avenue of 20 children's homes. Like you went in at the top of the avenue and down both sides of the children's homes. So there was about 125 kids living on this avenue. And I only knew, in all my time there over several years, I only knew of one young man that went to university. His name was Andrew Bradley. Wow. That's it, one young man. Wow. And so, that's how tough it would be really in order to do that.
Okay, so let's transition a little bit because, the contrast between how you started and where you ended up and what you're doing now is pretty substantial. And one of the things I'd like you to just kind of conclude with are if you had, some things to reflect on in terms of your own life, but maybe also some things that you could say to parents to provide hope, because maybe, when they think about your life, it's like, well, our home isn't that bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
But maybe there are some things that you could share that would be relevant for parents who are like, even if their kids aren't like in a bad way, what were some of the things that happened that caused you to move in the direction that you did?
Yeah, okay. And I kind of wrote a number of things down because I think it's important to be a bit structured. One of the things I thought was, when I was growing up, drugs were around, alcohol was around, tobacco was around, all that was around. But actually, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. It was kind of there, and people knew about it, but it wasn't the biggest deal. What also wasn't around was social media and digital media. And one of the things I would say the difference today, and it's really important to say, is that our children and young people are constantly under siege. They're constantly under pressure. And there is a relentless onslaught of digital media heading their way every day, 24/7. And if as a young person or a child you are not in that, then you are out. It's as simple as that. I didn't have those pressures. I think most people sitting here today never had those pressures. And you cannot underestimate that at all. It is a massive thing. And actually, the answer where you try and remove a smartphone from a young person for a week, that's not the answer. Actually, there are lots of other answers out there, and I'm sure the coalition would be very helpful in showing people how to help young people manage their digital media. But it is a massive pressure, and I don't want to undermine the fact that it's a small thing, it's a massive thing, and I think it's really important to talk about. I'm a parent. I'm married to Sarah. We've been married for 29 years. I have 2 children. They're both grown up, and I have a granddaughter who's nearly 2 now. And I learned an awful lot from my experiences about parenting, but I also learned an awful lot whilst I was parenting. I was often a year behind my children. You know, I was still treating them like they were an age and they'd moved on, and I think that's everybody's experience. But I kind of quickly caught up every time and tried to look ahead. So looking ahead was really important. But because of my experience, I also thought that it was really, really important to build a culture of confidence and hope under my children. And I had so many friends who had grown up in care, or I knew of people in care, and I kind of met with social workers a lot. And one of the things that I discovered was that people didn't make the transition from care to adult life as well as I did, is that they often were living in the past. You know, they were stuck in the past, they were apologizing for the past, they were living out of the past, and even, you know, it's possible if you've not had a terrible upbringing, if you've been through a divorce or a separation, or you've just had a bad time as a parent or as an adult and you're trying to parent your children, it's easy to be living an apologetic life, I think. And one of the things I would want to say is that life is not an apology for the past. And I know that's really hard because people think, how can I get out of that? But life is really to be an affirmation of a future hope, and that there is hope. And I love Josh's story, and you know, it's a fabulous example of that. So thank you. The other thing I thought was that, you know, I lived in a children's home, and I said it was on an avenue, and there were children's homes down both sides, and there were about 125 kids. And I soon learned that the African truth of it takes a whole village to raise a child was true. And actually, I would say, you know, a town like Pella, you're not on your own. Actually, it does take a whole town to raise a child. And, you know, and in the UK, I'm sure you have the same too, we have a phrase that's called corporate parenting, where we all accept responsibility for all of our young people and our children. And so that's, you know, whether we provide crossing patrol people to cross our children to school in the mornings to keep them safe, or whether it's we report on an incident that's happening to a child that we know about that's been identified to us, or whether we are offering help and support to a family that is in need, that's really important.
You know, one of the things you said earlier today that I really appreciated was that relationship starts before there's a problem.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Right? So
yes.
One of the things that you talk about is cooperating with other resources and saying, hey, you know what? Instead of waiting until the crisis,
yes.
build, and it's one of the things I love about the coalition. You know, you have educators, you have law enforcement, you have social service, you have churches, you have people from across the spectrum trying to say, hey, what can we do
Absolutely.
to help create a structure that provides support for parents and young people?
And I think, let me just say again, it takes a whole town to raise a child, and I think it's a good thing for parents to think about how you join the dots, therefore, from you as a parent to the school, to other services that are around, that you learn about what your children are going through, what the pressures are that are on them, what the threats are likely to be. And I think, again, Josh's experience of parents being able to speak into a child, not like to sit them down and give them lectures and turn them off, or give them good ideas about stuff to go and do, but to just gently feed and encourage and use opportunities, but not in a lecturing way, but in an encouraging way, in a supportive way, so that basically we're educating and loving and standing alongside and being there for them. And you know, the reality is that you know, I even heard this week of one young man who said to me, the thing is, you know, my dad doesn't spend a lot of time with me. And I thought, actually, you know, somebody once said, didn't they, nobody ever said at the end of their life, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. Mm-hmm. But I think so many people have said, I wish I'd spent more time with my children. And, you know, there's always an opportunity for more earnings, for more money, for better jobs, for better things and more stuff. But, you know, the opportunity to spend time with our children and young people is now. It's always now. And I think, I've always tried to spend time with my children. I was absolutely loving, that, encouraging them through things. And sometimes I see so many parents. My daughter danced. My son played football. When I say football, I mean real football. You might refer to it as soccer, which is a bit, it's a bit maligning, really. But they both played. I never expected either of them to go on to make that a profession, but they loved it. And when they came to an end of that, I said, that's great. But they'd spent several years doing it. They were disciplining themselves, either through body conditioning or through, learning the teamwork and everything else. And actually what they came out with, even though Adam didn't want to be a footballer, Jess didn't want to go into professional dancing, despite both of them having those opportunities, they just felt there was other things out there for them. And I wasn't kind of saying, oh, go on, you're going to be great, you're going to be a great big footballer and all that kind of stuff, really. And so I just think, encouraging them, but not like making your dream their dream is really important, but spending time with them. And let me just say though, it's impossible, and I think Josh bears this out, it's impossible to build secure, trusting relationships with your children without putting in the time. And that's really, really important. And if, the other thing I would say, finally, Peter, I'm sorry just to press it, but if you want a strong voice into your child's life and into their future, you've got to put into the time. Because other people are speaking into their lives. It used to be just their peers when they went out onto the street for, when the nights were light and they could enjoy that time together. And parents had difficulty even then speaking into the child's life. Just imagine a 24/7 digital media service coming into their lives, and that's their peers around them all the time, asking them to respond. And if they don't respond, they're out. So they have to stay in. And just imagine how hard that is, therefore, for a parent to be speaking into a child's life. It's a more difficult problem. And that voice, if you enable yourself to speak into a child's life through spending time with them, through encouraging them, through loving them, through showing them a place of hope and confidence in the home, that voice will revisit them in those difficult circumstances and places. And all I could hope for my children was, as they were growing up, that they'd hear Dad in the back of their minds, just with those little phrases, those little thoughts, that would revisit them when they were faced with difficult situations.
And one of the things, and then we'll close with this, one of the things that I picked up on, both from your story and what Josh was saying, is that sometimes we can be that encouraging voice in another kid's life. Like, we're talking a lot about the ways in which we can serve our own kids and be a parent, a good parent to our kids. But sometimes we could be that teacher, or we could be that law enforcement officer, or we can be that neighbor that speaks into another kid's life, those words that say, hey, you have value. And I think sometimes we might, I know this was true for me, sometimes we are shy about being that person, right? Sometimes we don't, I don't need to be. But just from what we heard tonight, those words can be so essential.
Oh my goodness. I mean, those words are essential. I just think, if it wasn't for John Cubbersley, and it wasn't for Barry Alcock, and it wasn't for Brian later on, I kind of just don't know where I would be. And I don't think they envisaged being a mentor or a tutor or a kind of, personal coach or anything like that. I think they just saw the need and responded. And I'm not sure how I was presenting that need. I was just being me as I thought at the time. But obviously, they clearly saw the need. And just like I volunteered to be a chaplain for the fire and rescue service, just because I saw stuff on the side of the road going on. I saw the appliances. I saw people, in ditches being dug out of cars. I saw ambulances turning up and taking people away. I just thought in my head, who's looking after them? I could do that. And I just picked up the phone. And if a town is going to raise children together, then actually it means that we all have to think about what is our contribution. Yeah. So volunteering, just noticing the need, getting our heads up from our own situation and thinking, oh, well, we've got it tough. Somebody might be having it tougher. You might be able to share with other parents. You might be able to share in a group. You might be able to share in the coalition. You might be able to, support the police officers and maybe help in the civilian areas of police or fire service life or medical life, and so whatever that might be, just thinking, actually, my contribution is not just within the family, it's to the wider community as well. And so when I see that need, I'll not just say, who's going to do that? I'll say, I might be able to do that. And falteringly just take the first step. I think that'd be really brilliant. Finally, can I just say, if you don't mind? Yeah.
You can.
what to do when things go wrong. Because the thing is, things will go wrong. That is the truth. You know, all the best parents I had, you know, I thought I was a great parent, but there were moments when, you know, my child came in from somewhere and I'm like, uh-oh, something's gone wrong there, and we have to deal with that. Just don't freak out. You know, it doesn't have to discount all the things that your child is, and all your parenting doesn't have to come to nothing because of an incident. And that's what some parents do. They think the child's, oh my goodness, you know, they're sunk to rock bottom, and everything that they've achieved beforehand is just kind of gone. And don't freak out. And remember that you're raising kids, and that you, if you just try your best, you know, those things do pay off. Try your best, give it your best. And if you can, be proactive. Don't wait till problems arrive. Talk to people, get involved with people, listen to people, you know, try and speak into their lives, build relationships, build family, build community, talk to different organisations. Don't bottle up if you feel there's a bit of shame coming your way. You know, because we can all as parents feel shame for what our children do. Don't bottle that up, share that. Get from under the shame, get out on top of that, get ahead of it, and help people. Help your own children, help other people's children, help your community to be strong in raising really healthy and productive children.
Well, Jeff, I just want to say publicly, and I've told you this privately, but I want to say it in front of this group. Thank you for making the choices you did.
Thank you.
Because, you know, your story is such an inspiration, and I can't even imagine how difficult it was at various junctures to say, you know what, it would just be easier to go back to the old thing, to go back to my, nobody expects me to do any good, and my family is just this way, that's how I must be too. And for whatever it was, you know, God's help, your convictions, thank you for making those choices. You are really an inspiration. And thanks for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My sister Samantha, just hold it, there you go, and my friend Lynn playing the piano, and we're gonna sing for you a million dreams, so hopefully you can dream with us as we sing.
I close my eyes and I can see the world that's waiting up for me, that I call my home. Through the dark, through the door, through where no one's been before, but it feels like home. They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say I've lost my mind. I don't care, so call me crazy. We can live in a world that we desire. So every night the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams are keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. A million dreams for the world we're gonna make. There's a house we can build. Every room inside is filled with things from far away. The special things I compile, each one there to make you smile on a rainy day. They can say it all sounds crazy. They can say we've loved The brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams are keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take.
A million dreams for the world we're gonna make.
However big, however small, let me be part of it all. Share your dreams with me.
You may be right, you may be wrong, and say that you'll bring me along to the world you see, to the world
I close my eyes to see. I close my eyes to see. 'Cause every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head.
A million dreams are keeping me awake.
A million dreams. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one I see. A million dreams is all it's gonna take. A million dreams for the world we're gonna make. For the world we're gonna make. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel Matthews, and I'm from the UK, and I met Pete, I think, earlier this year, and just really learned from him, and he invited us over to come and share a little bit of ourselves and our ministry in Pella, which has been amazing. And he wrote to me about 3 months ago, and he was like, and I'd really like you to do a poem at this event, and I was like, okay. And so I looked for a poem to read, and I couldn't find one, and then God really placed it on my heart to write one. And so this is the first time since I was about 7 that I've read a poem out loud that I've written myself. But this is about kind of my journey, and I think wherever we're at, I'm a mom, but I was also a teenager once. And I think wherever we're at, I'm hoping that, although it's my poem, it's, I think, one for us all. Hopeless, yet desperate to be hopeful. Lack of confidence, lack of judgment, lack of trust in who I was. I sought justification, adoration, validation in all the wrong places, avoiding any kind of confrontation. Hopeless, but longing to be hopeful. Who am I? Who was I? Who will I be? Will my mind always have its dark and lonely days, when the winds of questions come roaring over me and I can't seem to bounce back from the bottom? Hopeless, desperate to be hopeful. And yet the truth is that time ticks on. The nights are long and the days are short, and I still lack confidence sometimes, and I'm not 100% sure of who I am, because I still surprise myself. But no longer do I seek justification, adoration, validation in any place. And I'm learning to cope better with confrontation. I'm still me, after all. I'm still messed up, but now it's just some days. But I'm hopeful, because I know when the storms come, which they always do, my roots that have buried themselves deep into the earth's core as time has passed and the world has spun round and round again, have taken root a little deeper, and they've kept me upright, balanced in the wind. I may sway a little, I might even break a little, but you know what? I remain strong, because life has proved to me that there are always surprises around the corner.
There are new days to be embraced and cherished. There is always someone you can give your smile to. There is always someone who is happy to listen. And deep inside, there is always another outpouring of laughter yet to be released from your soul. We may be battered and bruised, but we're not done yet. Our branches may seem bare, but we're not finished. We're simply standing firm, waiting for a new season to begin. Full of expectation, full of anticipation, full of hope. Because after all, we are hopeful.
So we started off the evening by saying that what we hoped to provide was some encouragement, some support, some access to resources, some artistry that we hope was also helpful. And thank you for taking the risk with us. Thank you, even if you didn't know what you would experience. Thank you for coming. One of the things that I had on my heart as I was thinking about the event was that wherever you are in your journey as a parent, that you would feel like, at least as a result of some of this, you wouldn't feel alone in the journey. I know that's Trisha's heart. I know that's David and John's heart, that they want people to know that there are resources and support for you wherever you are. And so our hope is that even if nothing else happens, you can look around the room and you can say, hey, there are people here who want to be part of the journey with me. So thank you to everyone who participated. Your vulnerability. Samantha, you did awesome tonight. Was this your first time ever singing in public? Yeah, wonderful job. Really, really good. And so don't hurry away. Say hello to the person sitting next to you. If you want to come and meet some of the folks from the UK, I'm sure they would be glad to meet you. So thanks again for coming, and have a good evening.